Welcome to the Picky Girl Travels podcast, the show for Black women who want more out of life and to live it as they see fit. The message here is all about defying convention, embracing adventure, and regretting absolutely nothing. I'm your host, WHERE of pickygirltravelstheworld.com, and I am joined today by Tiffany McLean. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
All right. Where are you right now, Tiffany?
Right now, I am in Perpignan, France, which is close to the Spanish border.
Okay.
Deep south of France.
The deep south of France. Okay.
Yes.
And what are you doing there?
At this point, not much. I am just not wasting time. But living life casually until I go to WHERE Summer School, which is in June 26th.
What kind of summer school?
WHERE Summer School. It's in Amsterdam.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I would like you to tell the audience how it is that you ended up living in France.
Okay. Well, I still have a hard time saying I'm living in France.
I know, because as soon as I said it like that, I was like, does she consider herself to be living in France? I don't know. But I mean, you've been there for a minute.
I got here last August and I applied for a student visa. And I learned about, it occurred to me to apply for a student visa after attending one of the workshops that Rashida Exodus Summits hosted about how to live in France. It hadn't occurred to me to become a student in order to stay here long term, but I had studied French from 7th grade until the first year of college, and then after a couple of years, I spent like a month in Guadeloupe, which is a department of France in the Caribbean, learning French. And then off and on, I took classes at the Alliance Française when I was living in Portland. So it's not that I hadn't been to France where I didn't have any interest, but it just, I hadn't really, I think initially when I was thinking about doing a sabbatical, I was thinking about floating around. But COVID sort of made me not want to float as much, but still wanting to get away. So I decided, hey, I always regretted not studying abroad. So this is my opportunity. And I applied for the student visa and it was approved. And that's how I got here.
Okay. So this was part of your sabbatical?
I mean, I see it that way. I mean, I quit my job. So I'm not going
back. Okay, so let's back up a little bit. Why were you in need of a sabbatical?
I think so. I worked for an organization that had a pretty generous vacation and sabbatical policy. I mean, it gave us every 3 years we could take a sabbatical for a month. So, and I took advantage of those opportunities. But after being with the organization for 8 years, I think and I think with COVID as well, it gave me time to reflect, and it made me realize that I couldn't assume that what I wanted to do I would be able to do in the future. It just put a lot of things in perspective that I said I would do these things when I left in a couple of years or when I hit this age or before this time. And I just decided, no, I'm going to do it as soon as I can do it. So that was part of it. Also, like I said, I was one of the first employees, like within the first 2 years of this organization, and had seen a lot of changes and seen it through a lot of phases, and didn't really feel like I needed to see it through the next phase. It's the longest I ever worked anywhere. But I also wasn't really clear on what I wanted to do next. And I wanted to be able to take some time to figure that out and not feel like I had to jump into a new job without much reflection. That's why.
Okay. When you were saying that, you are not the first guest I've had who mentioned the pandemic as kind of being the thing. I don't know if we want to say the straw that broke the camel's back, the final piece to the puzzle, or what have you. So you're not alone in that. Do you think you would have done this had it not been, like, if the pandemic had not happened and life had just kept going the way it was going? You think you'd have done it?
Probably not at this moment. I mean, I left before the pandemic was over. Is it still over? It's not over yet.
No, it's not over.
But I don't think so, because the pandemic forced us to slow down. And, I think I would have probably been too busy maybe planning my next vacation to think about going away for a year. And, I just remember, coming across Stephanie Perry and Rashida's videos on YouTube during the weekend, where maybe I'd be out and about at a museum or something, but couldn't, So, and just, they sort of gave me the inspiration because I had really hard time. I'm somebody who always dreams forward, before the pandemic. I was always thinking about what am I going to do next? What was my next vacation going to be? But for a while, COVID kind of took that away. Because I couldn't see an end to it. I had a hard time imagining and dreaming forward for a minute. But so I think their YouTube channels and Exodus Summit sort of was the spark that I needed to get back to dreaming. To think there will be a time where you can get up and go. You can start to think about what you might want to see in the future. And so I didn't think maybe that it would happen so quickly. And the pieces just sort of fell, into place. And there was a point where, I had a conversation with my supervisor. I think it was November 2020. And I think we were doing my annual review. And I said, I don't think I'm going to be here in a year, but that's all. He didn't ask me any more questions. He didn't really want to know. I said it, but there was no follow-up. But I noticed that other people were, who were sort of early joiners of the organization were leaving too, or saying they were leaving, but it kept being drawn out. And I was like, I don't want to be like that. So I just decided to put a date out there to make the announcement that sort of made it real and made me have to put some things into place to go.
That's a bold thing to say during your annual evaluation. Like, I'm probably not going to be here with y'all next year. When you said that, how did you feel? Like,
it was a little nerve-wracking, but at the same, and I have to not acknowledge all the time, because I have been there so long. I had a level of comfort with, and I was on the executive team at that point. So it's like, I had already said that I was leaving. So what can happen? That doesn't mean that it's not scary to put it out there, but I didn't have a fear of losing anything besides my own sort of like maybe safety net. But yeah, I think it's just, I had a level of institutional privilege to be able to say that, and confidence. And
I don't know. Well, yeah, in confidence. I think that's the thing that stands out to me, because while I'm one of those people, like, I don't tell people the plan. So I think I would, if I were in your shoes and I put it out there in the universe, and then I've been like, but what if I don't? and I didn't said this, and what if I'm sitting right back here next year? So
well, maybe, like I said, I didn't want that to be the case because I had seen other people make the announcement and then they were still around like 6 months when I said it to him, I didn't even put like a date on it at that point. I just said, I don't think I'll be here in a year. And I don't even remember at this point, like if he had prompted me to say it. And I understand that, not wanting to tell people the plan. I totally understand that. But I also, it may have come in the context of him asking me like what my future was there. What did I see myself wanting to do next? And I have a hard time with, it's not like I'm going to be told, I don't want to mislead people either. And I can't make things up. Like,
no, I understand that. I get criticized because you ask me a question. My default is I am going to answer it honestly, even if maybe my honest answer isn't what you want to hear. A point in reference here is 2 weeks ago, Rashida asked me something and the answer just came out my mouth. And apparently it wasn't the nicest thing to say or the nicest way to say it. I don't know. So no, I get that. I feel you on that. You mentioned a year. Was that the plan, that you would be on sabbatical for about a year?
I wasn't sure because of COVID. Like I knew I was going to do the student visa. And so I only applied for, but I because I didn't know what COVID was going to be like in December, I only applied for a semester. I only paid for a semester. So I kind of gambled when I submitted the visa application by saying, like, here's my registration for a semester, hoping that they would give me the year, but no, they gave me 4 months, which they gave me enough for the semester. I knew I could apply for a renewal though. So, but I wanted to get here first and make a decision and not pay in advance for a second semester or anything like that. So I applied for a renewal in October. I had to make the decision pretty quickly. But yeah, it worked out. Not as smoothly as it could have, but it worked out. I'm here legally still.
That's good. I think it is important to mention how old you are making this decision to go study abroad.
I'm 43.
Okay. All right. So I not to put you on the spot, but I know that there are a lot of women who listen to this show who might be thinking, well, that's great, but she's young. Not to say 43 ain't young, but you know what I mean. So were there people in your life who thought that this didn't sound like the wisest decision to be making?
They kept it to themselves. I might have a little sort of like heard a little remark that I could interpret that way, or I could choose not to, but nothing direct to me. And I think people are sort of used to me being a little bit contrary to how I'm supposed to the path I'm supposed to walk. I think so. I didn't. Whatever people might have thought, they did not share it with me.
And did you at any moment think, "Oh, I'm in my 40s. Maybe I shouldn't be quitting my job to go be a student for who knows how long?"
Oh, I'm finished being with a student, but I will say, just to remind, I did have a friend who said that I was taking a big, what she saw as like a big, she didn't use the word gamble, but it was something like that. And I was surprised about that because it's like, I have all this savings. Like, that's how I saw it. It's like, I have an emergency fund. I have these savings. I have thought this through. To me, it didn't feel like a gamble. That piece of it. It's like, but I did realize that quitting my job, I don't think I felt it so much before I made the decision. It has come up, afterwards, like over the course of this year sometimes, because like I said, I'd been there 8 years. At some point, I was going to quit sooner rather than later, So that was, I think that was on the horizon. But yeah, the not working for a year, like I said, I don't think I didn't really question it too much before the decision was made. Or before I left. But yeah, over the course of this year, I thought, have I done the right? I mean, I think it was the right thing to leave the job that I was in, but to leave the career track altogether for a year. I have had that. I've questioned that, but not so much that I'm ready to running back.
I think that's maybe the bigger thing, because like you mentioned, you looked at it at first as, well, I can afford to do it. Like, I'll be okay financially. But I think the bigger thing is you stepped away from the hamster wheel. And that is not something we are taught that you do. Like, because there's so many people, and Rashida and I talk about this, who, one of the reasons they are hesitant to take a sabbatical is because it's like, well, what happens when I try to come back? Will I, take some kind of loss in my career field and that sort of thing? And to say, like, okay, like you said, you were going to leave that job eventually anyway, but then the choice not to, because most people, when they leave a job, it's because they have another one. Mm-hmm. And then you left a job and were like, I'm not going to work. I'm going to go live in France and, study some French and some stuff and not work, I may be taking liberty here, but I would assume in this year off, you've been like enjoying life, living life, not worrying about like, okay, so how I'm going to find a job when that time comes.
I mean, a little bit, but not too much. Like, I'll start and then I'll stop. But I think two things to that. It's not the first time I jumped off the hamster wheel. So that is one thing. I was in a PhD program 20 years ago, I think. Not quite 20 years, but almost. No, I started 20 years ago, and I was in that program for 5 years. I passed my comprehensive exams. I'm considered all but dissertation. I did 1 year of my dissertation research, and then I was like, I know this is not the life that I want. I could have finished and then, worked 3 more years on a dissertation and then tried to enter into the workforce. Or I could stop now. And that was a hard decision, maybe even harder than quitting this job, actually, because that was the first time that I ever quit something that I was good at. And, so I had some practice. The other thing that I think drove my decision is, I think because I am very aware that I wouldn't necessarily be able to do this later. So, or not as freely, not as flexibly. So I wanted to do it while I knew I could do it. And to me, that's also a risk that you take. If you put something off and you just assume that it's going to be there, that's a risk. And I was, when I was in the process of, learning how to manage my money and listening to financial podcasts that I didn't a lot of it I didn't agree with, but it was useful in order to, help me get my money straight. And I would hear every once in a while, someone would call in and say, usually the wife, my husband and I, we saved all these years to become millionaires so we could retire like X, Y, Z. He passed away. I don't know what to do. And I don't want to be like that, It's like, I think it is important to be like financially secure. I also think it's important to live your life in the present as well. To live your life. Yes. And not assume that it's going to be there, that when you're 65 or that you enjoy, or however, whenever you can retire at this point. or to wait until that day when you might become a millionaire. Like, so that also put things into perspective.
When you were talking about quitting the doctoral program, that just made me think, like, everything in our culture tells us quitting is bad. You know what I'm saying? But really, quitting is a very powerful thing if you think about it. Like, in that moment, because you said, like, you could have just trudged through those next couple of years, because at the end, even if you didn't want to pursue it further, you would have had that accomplishment. Mm-hmm. And I think by quitting before that, because you said you knew this was not the life that you wanted, that like, quitting is actually a very powerful thing. It's like to me, it's an act of taking back some power. I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but that's very much what I see.
Yeah, I just recently read Adrienne Maree Brown's Pleasure Activism. And she has a principle in there, I think, where she says, you listen to your no as much as you listen to your yes. Your no will lead you to your yes. And, I wasn't really that conscious of it back then, but I had to sort of trick myself into quitting, because I was during that first year of dissertation work, and it was New Year's Eve. I was feeling kind of low, and for a lot of different reasons. And sometimes when you're feeling low, you just start throwing stuff out there, what you might do with your life. And I applied for a summer job in Alaska. And, I think at the time, I don't know how much I was thinking at the time. I was just like, maybe telling myself, it's just a summer job, they're not paying me. My summer funding was over. So it's like, they're not paying me to do work on a dissertation over the summer. Like, I can do this. It's an adventure. But then, I applied, sort of forgot about it. And then they called me in, I don't know, early March, and offered me a job. And I said, no. I told them no initially. Like, I have to work on my dissertation, blah, 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 blah. But as soon as I told them no, as soon as I hung up the phone, I felt this horrible sensation in my body. And I didn't call them back, though. I just felt a lot of regret that I had missed out on an opportunity to go to Alaska. But a week or two later, I got another call from the same company, different person, offered me a job. And I felt like I had to take it. I could not say no. And so I went to Alaska that summer. I ended up, I was supposed to leave early August. I ended up staying the entire season, emailed my advisors late August, said I'm not coming back. And never went back to graduate school. So
this is something I did not learn until I was in my 40s, about how, like, when you turned down that job, you did the thing you were supposed to do, because, you know what I'm saying? And it immediately did not sit right with your soul. You felt it, but you didn't do anything about it. And that is how I was the vast majority of my life up until I was about 40, where I was all about doing what you were supposed to do, even if I didn't want to. I just put my head down and I made my way through it. And something occurred to me after I turned 40 about, like, there's a reason you had that reaction, but we're often taught not to listen to it. Call it intuition, call it whatever you want. And once that occurred to me, I have, like, made this effort to always try and, like you said, listen to the no just as much as you listen to the yes. Like, if I am contemplating something and Because you know when you don't want to do something, you know when you want to do something, but we often just dismiss it and do what we're supposed to. So I'm very thankful for you that they called you back, because it would be very sad that you had gotten to miss that.
That changed my life. Going to Alaska totally put me on a different path. So yeah, I was supposed to go there. Yeah.
You've quit things before. You quit this job. You're taking a sabbatical. Being in France as a student kind of was a means to an end. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so you did 2 semesters?
Yeah.
Okay. And how did you choose where you were or where you are? Because are you in the same place still?
No, I switched. For the second semester, I studied somewhere else.
Okay.
And they were both on my list, but I think I was basically choosing between 4 places. I was choosing between Perpignan, where I am right now, Montpellier, which is where I've spent my second semester, Grenoble, where I spent my first semester, and then Paris. And Paris got crossed off the list because it was too expensive. And yeah, I mean, they had 1 or 2 programs that were a little less expensive, but I could get more for my money elsewhere. And then I ended up choosing Grenoble initially because I like mountains. And yeah, that was the primary reason. And then Montpellier was on the list because it has apparently 300 days of sunshine. And ended up doing both. So, 1 semester in each place.
Now, I don't know, was becoming a student again at 43 difficult?
Yes. I think primarily it may have been less difficult if it was the American way of education, where you can sort of pick your classes, pick your schedule. I realized once I got here that I've lived a very flexible life. Like ever since I've been in college, I've been choosing a schedule that worked for me. And in my last job, I worked remotely pre-COVID. I worked pretty typical hours, but I had a lot of flexibility. And so I think the hardest thing initially was just having to show up somewhere when they told me to, and not having a schedule that it was just in this particular program. Once you take your evaluation, they assign you a group, and that group has a schedule. So it's not like you're picking classes. I'm going to take this class and this class, or I'm going to choose the Tuesday morning class. It's no, this group is going to do this schedule. And you got a little bit of a choice with the cultural requirements. But still, it was not, that was the hardest part for me. And I think the second hardest part for me is that it's been so long since I've been a student that I realized I forgot how seriously I take it. So even though this is a choice for me, like a lot of my classmates are trying to get into graduate schools here. They need a certain level of French in order to qualify for the programs they want to get in. For me, it's just for fun, right? But I have a hard time like skipping class, like not taking my grades seriously. Like I want to do well. And I felt that in myself, and I didn't realize how much it's like, wow, relax. Like you don't have to be, this is just for fun, and having to tell myself that over and over again, that this is a choice. So I learned some things about myself, which I guess you're supposed to do during your sabbatical.
Yeah.
But those are the 2 hardest things.
And because one of the questions that I had was, like you mentioned, you did not study abroad when you were younger, when you did an undergrad. So was this experience, or has this experience been what you expected it to be?
I don't know what my expectations were of the experience. I think I was so busy just trying to get all my ducks in a row to get here that I didn't really think about what was going to happen when I got here. So I think what I liked about the experience, which I really didn't think about beforehand, was that, I mean, everybody was from first, because it was we were really still in the height of COVID when I got here. I thought maybe the classes would be smaller. No.
Oh.
People were here on their visas. So it was the first time that I been around people since the start of COVID, like in close quarters. But that taught me that masks do really work. Because we were required to wear them up until like the middle of this second semester, and very few people got sick. But aside from that, I think I liked being in the class with people from all over the world. Like, even though I would like to know more French people, it made conversation interesting to be in a class with people from all over the world. And yeah, so I think that was a benefit that I didn't really, it's like, of course, I think that in most of the context, the majority of the context in which I've studied French, I've been with other Americans. But actually, there weren't that many Americans in either of the programs that I was in. In fact, in the second one, I don't think I maybe met my first American during final exams. And so the majority of the students were actually, at least in the first school, actually from Asia. And so one thing that occurred to me it was that I have more opportunity to have casual conversations with Chinese people than I ever would in China if I were visiting China. You know what I mean? We were all trying to learn French. And then I think in the second school, there was much more of a mix. Like in the first school, people were they were younger, really, kind of right out of college or in college, transitioning to graduate school, and mostly not necessarily trying to live a life here in France, but wanted to study here in France. Whereas in the second program, I was not. I mean, the first program, I was the oldest person in my class. In this program, I was not even the second oldest. It was much more of a mix of people who are trying to make a life in France and need the language in order to either work or, get a new degree, because a lot of them already had graduate degrees from their home countries. And so I liked the diversity of the second school, where we were, much more age diverse, and just experience diversity too.
Okay. And so you have been living a life in France.
I have, yes.
Okay. So I don't know, what has that been like? Because I mean, you're doing it, and this is what I think made me be like, I need to talk to her, because I saw some of your Facebook posts commenting on the elections there. And so I think you're living this life in France at a very interesting time in history, given what things look like in the US, given what's happening in Europe. What's that been like? How have you felt?
I definitely feel more secure here. And I think it was, initially just secure COVID wise, because, there were a lot of protests here against the COVID restrictions. So, so that was interesting, but not the way they were in the United States, where people were just blatantly not following the rules. It was more of like, we are going to voice our objection to these rules. You know? And but I felt secure because there were rules and that they were uniform, no matter where you went in France. So the one thing that I have taken away from this experience is that I'm so tired of states' rights. Like,
I feel you.
Because if the national government here decides to do something, I'm not saying that there aren't departments who have their own policies. They do, but the extent to which they can override something that the national government has determined is necessary for the safety and health of the country I don't think it actually exists. And so just the level of consistency made me feel safe. And just it felt like there was some intention. I was listening to a podcast where someone was saying, it's not that the French government doesn't get anything wrong. They do, but the people in the government, for the most part, are trying to do their best. Like they're trying to govern. Even if you don't like their policies, even if their policies are problematic, there's like a general sense that they are trying to govern. Whereas in the United States, it's not.
I can't say that. Yeah, I can't say that anything I see happening right now in the US is because somebody is trying to govern. It is
right.
That is not the motivation.
So just that intent gives me a lot of security. It's like, no, does everything they say make sense? No, but there's at least some intention there to govern. And then I think, what else? How else do I feel secure here? I mean, yes, they had this. This was interesting because I had a friend from China who has never seen an election. Democratic election.
Where would they?
And then you have the U.S. news, and in French news as well, like playing up the progress of the right here, and they are making progress. But when you see the result of the election, and there's a 12 to 15% gap between the winner and the far right option, and in the United States is like 2%. Like, I'll take it.
Yeah.
And I had to show, because I was trying to explain to my friend why, like, this was, because she's married to someone who is French, and she's like, when I saw that news, I thought, this percentage of French people don't want me here. And I was like, that's valid.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, I say I was afraid. Not afraid, I was anxious, but the election results sort of put me at ease. In the sense that, compared to the United States.
Yes. I think that's the thing, because there was, who is it? I know, like, some of my former students live in France, and I'm trying to think who else I know that was following the election. And there was a lot of concern about how close the French election was. And in comparison to the United States, it doesn't seem close at all. But in comparison to France 10 years ago, this was very, very close.
And I just realized, because, I'm still learning, but it doesn't, the little regions and cities, and they have so many more political parties. So it's like, the way they break down is so interesting. It's not just like a cut down the middle type of thing. And so it's really hard to assume, how things are going to play out, because there's, it's just a different dynamic here.
How long do you think you'll be there?
Well, I am here until I'll get kicked out into August. I left after my student visa expired in May. So I went to London for a week and a half and came back as a tourist. So I can be here for 90 days. And that 90 days will be up in almost exactly a year from the day that I arrived.
And does that mean that the sabbatical is over?
I mean, yes and no. I'm starting to, tiptoe my way into doing some consulting, freelance. Like I can't not work forever. So I am starting to explore what my work life will look like when when this is over, this year is over, but I'm also considering what it would look like to come back here on a auto entrepreneur visa, which is the closest thing that they have to. I mean, it's not even really a remote work visa. It's more of like you are a sole proprietor here in France, which is the closest thing that they get to a remote work visa. And if I want to, go through that red tape to be able to live here, at least for another year.
So, okay. When we started talking, you were talking about how you always kind of dreamed forward, and the pandemic sort of took that away from you because it was like, everybody got to sit down and you can't go anywhere. So the observer in me looking at your life from the outside, it seems like you're at kind of a crossroads here.
Definitely.
And does this feel different? Are you anxious?
It feels, I'm not always anxious. Sometimes I'm anxious, but it doesn't last that long. It feels, every time that I start to feel anxious, I remind myself that I've been in a similar situation before, because, my mom has said a couple of times over this year, you always have a plan. Like, because sometimes she'll ask me a question and I'll be like, I don't know. When are you going to be XYZ? I don't know. And she's just like, I can't believe you don't have a plan. And then that makes me a little insecure. It's like, am I supposed to have a plan? But I've also been just, to quote Adrienne Marie Brown again, she talks about like moving toward the horizon you can see. And I can't see very far right now. So I just I can see until August. I know I can stay here until August. I have a few contracts I have to fulfill. That's what I know. And as I get closer, maybe more of the horizon will come into view until I can see a bigger picture. I tell myself that in order to quell any anxiety that I have about not having it all worked out. It's like, once I know what I want very clearly, then it's easier to move in that direction. But I'm also still in that process of, figuring out where I want to put my energy.
I am a recovering planner because I did not have much of a safety net. So I was always trying to think ahead and anticipate and all that. So I'm very glad you mentioned this. And I like that way of thinking, like moving toward the horizon you can see. Like, why stress yourself out trying to sort out all this shit you can't figure out yet? Focus on what you can see and move there. So I love that. And then the other thing that you said about figuring out what you want, I think, and once you know what you want, everything can kind of come together. And I think we often get caught up in, I'm supposed to have a plan. I got to make a plan. And it's, how you going to make a plan when you don't know what you want? And that makes sense as I say it now, but I'm guilty of it, of oh, I got to figure all this stuff out and how I'm going to do it, but I don't even know what it is I want to do. So I don't know. Or maybe I'm having my own little epiphany here, but but I like that you said this because I want people to know it's okay. We ain't got to have it all figured out. Like the world does not come to an end because you don't. Because if anything, I think there were people who struggled with this when the pandemic started, that they had these grand plans. Mm-hmm. And the pandemic threw a wrench into it. And it was like, well, what do I do now? Like they couldn't compensate for that thing not working out and them not being able to stick to the plan.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I only ask out of curiosity, not because I'm trying to pressure you into having a plan.
I know. Yeah. I mean, I know that even if I go back to the United States, I don't want to feel shackled to it, So that's one thing I know very clearly. I want to be able, and I knew this, honestly, when Trump got elected, I was like, I need to be ready to run, and it, took me a few years. But so that's something I know. Like I never want to feel like I am trapped there. And I know that I'm still at the point in my life where I need to earn money, and I want financial security. And yeah, I want to be able to stay connected with my friends, my old friends. So the things like that I know I want. But like what that looks like on a day-to-day, I'm not sure yet.
And I heard that if I go back to the States, I heard that.
Yeah, because I think if you'd asked me in April or March, I was open. I was more open to it than I am now. Now I feel like every time I open my browser or my phone, the messages are like, don't come back, don't come back, don't come back.
I have disengaged from the news in the US. Like something happened, like I get a trickle of it through Facebook. And I was like, oh, that's going on? Like, because for my mental health, I have just kind of completely disengaged. And I'm unapologetic about it. I really am. Now, if somebody is listening to this podcast and you have piqued their interest about life in France, about becoming a student in your 40s, about quitting jobs and walking away, if they want to follow you or, just see what you're up to, where can they do that?
They can find me on Instagram at Black Like Tea spelled like the drink. Yeah, you can just DM me on Instagram.
There we go. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was good talking to you.
Same. I love to share the stories of Black women who are living life on their terms. And it doesn't, you may not think what you're doing is that big of a deal, but it is.
Oh.
It is. Because I think you're coming from a place where you've kind of always sort of done your thing. But for a lot of us, it's hard to get to that place. And I think it is helpful to see other Black women who are doing it. And then you can kind of step back and say, okay, what does that look like for me?
Yeah.
So I appreciate you. As I mentioned, as I said to Tiffany, I think I wanted to share her story because I think sometimes we get caught up in thinking that living life on your terms means it has to be something big and grand, like the shift you make in your life has to be something huge. But really, it's about doing the things you want to do, saying yes to the things that bring you joy, saying no to the things that aren't fulfilling you, whatever that happens to look like. And again, she decided to pursue living abroad, studying abroad, something she didn't do when she was younger. She decided to do that in her 40s. I want everybody listening to this to know that it is never too late for you to live the life that you want. It doesn't matter how old you are. So that's it for this week, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. If you're here on YouTube, please subscribe because we're trying to hit 10,000 subscribers. If you're listening to this on your podcatcher, be it like Spotify, Google, Apple, I appreciate y'all too. Thank you so much for supporting the podcast. If you want to support the podcast in other ways, share these episodes. You can contribute financially. There are links below in the description. If there is a topic specifically that you would like to hear, shoot me a DM, leave a voicemail. There's a link to voicemail in the description. Till next time.